Alright, hi everybody, this is Carol from Segovia Quilts, and today I'm going to be talking about what a pieced backing is, and then I'm also going to be showing you guys how to do a pieced backing. So now this is a quilt top that I have just recently completed, and this quilt measures currently 80.5 inches by 90.5 inches. And this is the fabric that I'm going to be using to do a pieced backing. So now what a pieced backing is, it's any backing that requires you to sew seams anywhere on the backing. So now if you go to the fabric store, say Joann Fabrics or any kind of quilt shop, they are going to have fabric that is specifically for backings. It's called backing material. And this fabric usually measures about 108 inches by however many yards you need. So it'll be 108 inches across the top, and then just however much you need. Or the other way around, you could do 108 inches down the side by however much you need. Okay, so this particular quilt, it's 80.5 inches by 90.5 inches. So if I was going to use backing fabric that measured 108 inches, I would go 108 inches this way by, I would probably need 2¼ yards, because 80.5 inches comes out to just a little over 6.5 feet, 3 feet in a yard. So I would probably go with 2¼ yards, just to give me a little extra wiggle room on each side. And then I would only need 2¼ yards of backing fabric. Now, doing a pieced backing means that you have seams somewhere in your backing. You're not going to get one solid piece of material. So now today we're going to do a very simple backing. It's going to be one seam straight down the middle. But there are many different kinds of backing you can do, and I'll show you guys a couple of pictures of different kinds of backing, and I'll include the links to those websites down in the description below. So make sure to check them out, because you can do so much with your backing for your quilt. So alright, let's go ahead and get right into it. I have already pre-washed this fabric because it's red. It's such a bright color. I definitely didn't want to worry about any kind of bleeding or anything onto the quilt, because there are blocks on this quilt that are white or lighter colors, and I didn't want to have to worry about the red bleeding over. So I have pre-washed this fabric. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and iron it, and then I'm going to show you guys how to actually start piecing it. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, so I have finished ironing all of my backing fabric. Now I'm going to show you guys how I like to make sure that I will have more than enough fabric. Now, before I even bought my backing fabric, I used a calculator online, and I've included the link down below. I used a calculator to figure out exactly how much I would need. So now this is not the fabric that's 108 inches. This is just regular fabric off of the bolt. So it's about 44 inches across. So I have my tape measure here that we can use to measure it. So I'm just starting at one selvage and going all the way to the end. And this measures 44¼ inches. So now you figure you've got about a ½ inch on each side that is selvage, so you won't necessarily want to include that in your quilt. So now again, my quilt is 80.5 inches by 90.5 inches. So since this fabric is 44 inches, what I plan on doing is I plan on sewing straight down the selvage. I'm going to bring the two ends together. Oops. So these are my two ends. I'm going to bring them together, and I'm going to sew straight down the selvage all the way down the length of my fabric. So now I got 5½ yards of this fabric. So that will be more than enough for me to get the amount of material that I need. So I'm just going to do some math here with you guys. So if I got 5.5, let's see, here we go, 5.5 yards comes to 16.5 feet. So I did my 5.5 times 3 feet in a yard. So my fabric currently is 16.5 feet long. So again, I'm going to sew down both ends here all the way down. So let's split that in half. So we've got that split in half. So that's 8.25 feet. So now again, I know my quilt is 90.5 inches long, so we have 8.25 feet to work with. So let's go ahead and see what 90.5 inches divided by 12, which is 12 inches in a foot, that comes to 7.5 feet. So my quilt is 7.5 feet long. I have 8.25 feet to work with. So I'm going to have more than enough fabric on the top and the bottom, and a couple of inches extra on the sides to work with just from this fabric alone. So I wanted to show that to you guys. This is how I do it, but again, I did all of these measurements before I actually bought my fabric because I needed to make sure I bought enough. But again, you could avoid all of this math altogether if you just bought the backing fabric, which again is 108 inches, and then by however many yards you need. The reason why I didn't get that fabric was they didn't have the specific red that I wanted. Now this is for a client's quilt, and she specifically asked for red. Now they had like a dark maroon and some patterned fabric, but I just wanted to get a solid red. And yes, I could have ordered it, but I didn't want to have to wait. So which is fine. I'm just going to piece my backing together. Alright, so now that we've ironed everything, we can go ahead and move on to the next step, which will actually be sewing these two ends together. So again, I'm going to sew, these are the two ends. So if I was to open this all the way up, this end would be here, and this end over here would be 5.5 yards away. So what I'm going to do is fold this over, and I'm just going to line it up right here. And I'm just going to sew straight down, and obviously these folds won't be here, I'll open them up, but I'm just going to sew straight down the selvage. And I'm going to do probably about 3/4 inch in, because I don't want my stitching to be in the selvage. I want it to be, you know, in the fabric, so I don't have to worry about it distorting, you know, after washings or anything like that. So I'm going to sew probably about 3/4 inches in, and then we'll move on to the next step from there. So let me go ahead and get this set up on the sewing machine, and I will show you guys how I go about sewing this together. So now we are all set up and ready to start sewing down our, well, right next to our seam allowance. So I'm going to go ahead and do I'm going to go ahead and do a 5/8 inch seam. So I have a line here on my plate. I'm just going to go ahead and keep the edge of my selvage right on that 5/8 inch little mark. So I'm going to go ahead and get that set. Okay. So I'm just going to go in a couple of stitches so that I can readjust my fabric down here and make sure that both of these edges are lined up. And then pretty much I'm just going to sew down the entire seam. Now I did change my bobbin thread and my spool up top, so both of my threads are now this color. I use the cone threads, and this particular color is called Tomato, and it's the Sherlock brand, and I got that from Joann Fabrics. So you guys can see here it matches perfectly. So here's my top and my bottom, and I matched my thread this way. You know, you're not going to see any different color in there in that seam. If you do see a color at all, at least it'll blend in very nicely and you won't even notice it. So now, like I said, I'm just going to continue sewing down the rest of this line here until I get to the end. So I'll go ahead and speed that up for you guys. Okay, so I've finished my seam line all the way up the fabric, and I've come down to the end of my fabric. So now this is the fold from where I took my long strip of fabric and I folded it in half. So now what I like to do is I'm going to come down to about 1/4 of an inch right here, and then I'm going to stop. You can backstitch if you want. You don't have to. We're going to end up trimming off this bottom half anyways once we finish quilting our quilt. But I will show you guys. I don't like to come all the way just because once I finish this seam, I'm going to put my scissors right in here and I'm going to cut all the way down. So let's go ahead and finish this up. There we go. And I'm going to cut my thread, and that's it. So like I said, you can backstitch here if you want. It's up to you. You don't have to. I'm not going to worry about it. Even if a couple of my stitches come out, that's alright. So now let me go ahead and zoom the camera out and show you guys the seam. There. Alright, so here is the rest of our seam all the way to the top. So now I'm just going to go ahead and straighten out this end part so that I can get a relatively straight cut. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to end up trimming this off in the end anyways. There we go. So let me get my good scissors. Alright, so these are my good scissors. I prefer these when I'm going to be doing any kind of, I don't know, cutting. Alright, so now, like I said, I'm not necessarily worried about it being super straight because I'm going to trim this off. I'm just going to kind of lay it over everything else, and then I'm going to put my scissors here in the end, and then I'm just going to cut the whole way. There you go. I hope I'm not in the way, but if I am, I'm sorry. There. Alright, so now we have opened up that little end fold, and our seam is right here in the middle, and this is what it'll look like. I know it's a little difficult because, you know, of the color, but this is what it'll look like on the back of the quilt. See, and so in the event, you know, this gets pulled open or stretched or whatever, you're just going to see that tomato color thread in there. You're not going to see black or white or anything like that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this seam. I'm going to take it to the iron. I'm going to set the seam, and all that is just leaving it like this and putting your iron on top of it to really settle that thread in those in between those two pieces of material. So I'm going to set my seam, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to iron my seam open. Now there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. So now you can iron both seam allowances in one direction or the other. You can do that, or you can iron your seam allowances open. And all that means is you're going to open it like this, and then you're going to run your iron right down the middle so that you have a seam allowance on both sides of your stitched seam. Now, you can do it however you want. There's really no right or wrong way. One main reason why people do iron their seams open is because it reduces the bulk on one side of your seam. You know, if I was to iron both of them over here, I'm going to have a little bit more bulk on this side than on this side. But if you iron it open, you're going to have an even amount of bulk on both sides. So again, you know, I mean, it's personal preference, honestly. If you iron both of them to one side or do it open, it's not going to affect your quilt negatively or positively. It's really personal preference. So I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, set my seam. Then I'm going to iron my seam, or iron my seam allowances and get that all nice and crisp. And then that's pretty much the end of my particular backing. Now there are, like I said, there are so many different things that you can do to the back of your quilt to really make it stand out, to really make it pop. It's really up to you, and try some different things out. Have fun with it. Who says you have to do just a simple backing like this? Because if I really wanted to, what I could do even is, instead of just sewing this seam here, I could have used material from the shirts that I'm doing this quilt with, and I could have done a strip. I could have done a strip right between these two reds of different colors of the t-shirts. So I could have cut, say like a 3-inch by, I don't know, 12-inch strip. And I could have pieced several of those strips together enough to get my entire length of the quilt. And I could have sewn the red to either side of this. So instead of just being solid red, there would be red right here, different strips of color, and then red. You can do so many different things. So like I said, I've included links to different pictures here that I included in my video, so make sure to check those out. And like I said, just play with it and have fun. There's really nothing that you can do wrong when it comes to your backing, so long as your backing is big enough to cover the entire quilt so that you can actually get it all quilted down, you're good. So yeah, just have fun with it, and I'm sure it'll look great. Okay guys, so I've pressed my seam, and I set my seam first and then I pressed it open, and I wanted to show y'all that. So here's a section of the two pieces that I just sewed together. This is my seam here, and you see that it's nice and pressed open. And then this is the right side, and this is that seam. See, it's beautiful. Let me see if I can clear that picture up a little bit for y'all. My camera's not so great at focusing close up. Well, yeah, I don't know. Well, so this is it. This is what it'll look like on the back side of the quilt. So, see, it's very nice, and there's really not a whole lot of bulk. You can see a little bit of the, I guess, discoloration, if you will, from having that flap of red laying right against it right here. You can see that, and then right there it's just a slight color change, but you really can't see that, you know what I mean? So this is it pretty much. And so now what I'm going to do, now I had planned on laying it on the floor and showing it to you guys all laid out, but I haven't vacuumed the floor yet, and it's still pretty early in the morning, so people are still sleeping. So I didn't want to lay it on the floor until I got a good vacuum, because we got a dog over there. But this is it. This is pretty much how you do a pieced backing. And this is the same process that I do for all of my quilts, regardless of what size it is. Now granted, the smaller the quilt, the less chance there is of you having to do a pieced backing. So if I was to do a baby quilt, which I think is traditionally 36 inches by 36 inches, you would not need to piece your backing, because the fabric off of the bolt measures 44 inches. So all you would need is, I would say maybe 1 1/4 yards of fabric, just to give you that little extra couple inches on either side. You would just need 1 1/4 yards of fabric, and that's it. So yeah, this is how I do my piece backings. Again, there are so many different things that you can do with your backing, so make sure you go out there and look at the fabric that's sold sold in 108 inches. Definitely check out that fabric. There are so many different fun and interesting patterns that you can find out there in the backing fabric. And then definitely also check out different piece backings. Hit up Pinterest, because Pinterest has a lot of pictures and great ideas. So definitely check that out. And if you guys have any questions or anything, definitely leave me a comment or send me a message on my Facebook page, and I will do my best to answer your question or provide you a little bit more clarity. So thank you for watching my video. Please make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, I guess I will see you guys later.